We ended off with CFL. We begin with the OHL a little bit. We'll move south of the border to Flint, Michigan. And why? Well, it's pretty simple. You have an owner, Ralph Nielsen, who didn't like the fact that the coaching staff out there didn't give his son playing time. His 17-year-old son, who's a rookie, by the way, not going to always get the big minutes. He's only played, I believe, in 5 of the 17 games so far this season. And I guess that prompted Ralph, the owner, to fire the entire coaching staff. Yeah. But after some protests from the players, they were not happy. In fact, they threw their jerseys onto the floor and included Mr. Ralph Nielsen's son to do the same and said, you know what, if they're being fired, we're quitting. And the coaches have been reinstated a day later. They'll be playing their game soon enough. And I guess everything is right in the world. But you have to think to yourself, what happens in this case with the owners? Because the owners can't always have the autonomy. And I'm going to go and throw this to you, Andrew, at the beginning, because you are familiar with the Ontario Hockey League. You've covered it a little bit with Sarnia Sting. What do you make of this, and should punishments be handed out to the owner for what seemed foolish, in my opinion?
It's actually a thing that runs wild through the Ontario Hockey League. This isn't the first time. This is about the 3rd or 4th time that parents own teams, draft their kids, and then make these demands. Like Connor Burgess up in, I think it was Sault Ste. Marie, had the same problem where, and he all been told that I'm not good enough to play in this league. I shouldn't be here because I'm not good enough. Scouts were saying the kid's not up to that level of playing. So there's got to be something that's got to be done, especially when you have these parents drafting their kids. I had the same thing in Sarnia with the Cicerellis drafting their own kid, and he didn't put up any kind of great numbers at all. And you're wondering, why'd you spend a 5th round pick on a kid who in minor midget, didn't even do that great either? It's parents wanting to put themselves and, obviously put their kids in the best light. But when you come to that position where you are and, you're one step away from getting these kids to the NHL, I think the league has eventually got to stop in and say, okay, we got to look at this. Like, it's great to draft your kids and all, but do they actually fit in your lineup? And are you willing to ruin the reputation of your team, your organization, and ruin the futures of other kids who are, trying to make it to the NHL as well?
No one's talking about the Flint Firebirds as a team that is good in terms of their product on the ice. They're talking about the extracurricular stuff with their owner. That's got to be bad PR in every sense of the word. But Richard, you've been in a situation where you've coached. I know you're a part of speed skating around, so you might be able to involve a little bit here for us. Have you had a chance to coach a family member, and if so, do you actually lean towards them, or perhaps you may do the opposite and be a lot harsher?
Well, I coached both of my sons in soccer, but that was at a very minor level league, and then in speed skating, I coached my younger son, and he was provincial team level, and I think my tendency was to be harder on him, just to make sure that nobody, none of the other parents would say, well, he's favoring his own kid. He had to perform. He had to produce just like any other athlete. And you're the parent. But in this case, it's an ownership situation. It's not even a coaching situation. And you can get into the whole issue as to whether owners should interfere with the coaches they hire. These coaches weren't doing a bad job. The team's 7-9. The team's got a decent record. I guess they've moved from another location. They're not strictly speaking an expansion team, but that level of interference. When I was coaching, we were a small club. It was all parental volunteers that were involved, and actually, when you looked around the province, there were a lot of situations where a lot of the other coaches were also in situations where they were coaching their own kids. And, I would, talk to those coaches as to, what do you do to just avoid that perception, avoid the situation, and at the same time give your own child, a fair shake. The last thing you want to do is make it harder on them or put them in a situation where they're not able to enjoy the sport because you're being the overbearing, wannabe, living vicariously through your kid. And I think that's a little bit what's going on with his owner.
Okay, how about this? We'll move on and talk about something a little serious, much more serious, and shouldn't be a little serious. The situation that happened at University of Missouri. A lot of minorities, the minority students, felt that there was institutional racism within the school. It got to the point where you even had the sports teams themselves protest and say, we're not going to play a game until something gets addressed. It turned out that the Missouri president, the president of the university, did step down, as well as another prominent member within the school. I think maybe the I don't know, it's hard to say in this case, and I'm trying to put it eloquently. And I don't want to so much talk about the Wolf stepping down, the president, but more so of the actual players and the athletes themselves. You saw the basketball team, predominantly the football team, say we're going to actually forfeit our game, and if this continues, if nothing gets done. We saw something get done. Mm-hmm. Richard, does sport have any, I guess, influence in our society? We always think of it as a game. After it's done, we kind of shove it on the side. We only get a couple of minutes here or there on the actual newscast. But do you actually see sport perhaps making a prominent role in that it could perhaps change society, change the way we look at certain laws or things get done?
Well, it can. It absolutely can, and it can be a driver for forward progress, but it can also be a hindrance to making forward progress on important social issues. I mean, I think of, the situation, if you saw the movie, I think it was Invictus, the one about the South African rugby team.
Yes.
Fantastic movie, great book. And, it talks about how really with all of the struggles, in the, post-apartheid years, when Nelson Mandela came to power, how rugby became a vehicle for a stronger sense of cooperation between whites and blacks in South Africa. Mm-hmm. And there was just recently the story about the third guy on the podium in 1968 in the Mexico Olympics, when Tommy Smith and John Carlos gave the Black Power salute on the podium. The third guy, who was an Australian, supported them in what they did and actually wanted to put the black glove on as well. But they discovered they didn't have another pair of gloves. And that's the reason why each athlete was only wearing one glove, because they only had one pair of gloves between the two of them. If they'd had another pair of gloves, that athlete, the white athlete from Australia, would have been wearing a glove as well. And he was he returned to Australia, was completely ostracized, and years later, after he passed away, received a pardon and a special commendation for his courage from the Australian government. I mean, sport has a tremendous capacity for moving, the whole social consciousness, I'll call it, forward. It does, because it's important to people. And I mean, in the case of Missouri, you multiply that by the fact that it's not only important to people, but it's also important financially to the school. I mean, we know university sports in the States is multi-million-dollar business.
They make big dollars, and there was obviously a big issue with the whole, I guess, with race recently in the United States. Andrew, what are your thoughts on this?
Well,
and do you feel that there is hope with sports making change in our society?
Especially at the NCAA level. Like, these are young adults doing this, and you talk about a vehicle. What bigger vehicle in NCAA than football? And when your football team is threatening to give up so much, like, it's a lot to these kids, like, their draft statuses and their scholarships and their pretty much their life, in the sense they don't play football, they're out. That's how it's going to work in the NCAA.
I want to talk to you about this one. We're going a complete 180 with this topic now, and we're going to move on to Greg Hardy, and you talk about how sport can be a positive thing. Mm-hmm. We're seeing the negative side of this. This is a guy who had abused his girlfriend. The photos came out on Deadspin recently. The comments have been abhorrent, and rightfully so, about what he's done, but yet he is still allowed to play. And then you look at the warning signs that have been there time and time again. When he came back after the 4-game suspension, it was originally 10 that got reduced. Made a fool of himself. He talked, I guess, lewdly about Brady's wife, Tom Brady's wife, just prior to the game. Then you look at his actions towards the special teams coach by shoving a coach. Never mind getting into the face of your actual teammates, your employees, other employees. He went after an employer, and he went after a coach. That is not acceptable. These are warning signs, but it looks like Jerry Jones, the owner of the Cowboys, is saying, you know what? It's just one of those things. How would you describe this? How would you, I guess, categorize Jerry Jones, the NFLPA, for appealing that 10-game suspension. And I don't know if you want to say, we'll just throw in the Dallas Cowboys on top of that, and how the players and coaching staff is just saying, you know what, it's under the rug.
Yeah, that never solved anything. And the NFL, in a broader sense, when you think back to the Ray Lewis situation, and and really the history of the last 5 to 10 years of the NFL is pretty embarrassing overall. The kinds of things that players have become involved in, domestic violence, assaults, murders, you name it. This is a league where the players' code of conduct in many instances is practically out of control. And the level of sanction and the level of tolerance to it, is a way, to me, if this is going to be the example for young people, I don't see how this league, can pretend that it's, and again, big money, but how this league can pretend that it's a positive role model for young people. I mean, I think, in answer to your question, I think the Cowboys' response to it, totally inadequate. Domestic violence is a serious matter, and it's pretty clear that this guy doesn't get it, that the Cowboys don't get it, and that they're, like I say, they're just not responding to it in a way that they need to.
It's true. We're getting short on time, Andrew.
Yeah, like we always blame Roger Goodell for everything. When do you start blaming yourself and start looking in the mirror and saying, maybe we need to clean up at a lower level? Dallas needs, Jerry Jones needs to start doing something. The Cowboys need to start. Hardy needs to start doing something himself. We keep blaming.
He hasn't apologized. Doesn't look like he's been remorseful.
And that's the problem. Like, when do you, people always like to keep it in the team. Okay, well, then the team should take responsibility for it. This is what your player's doing. You can't keep relying on and throwing it all under Goodell and saying, well, he's not cleaning up the league. He can't control X amount of players in this league and what they do. The teams need to start taking some responsibility.
But he can't control the owners, and that's the big thing. And money talks. And if you can actually pressure somebody, like sponsors are starting to do, or people telling sponsors to pressure, then we might see some positive change. All right, guys, we're going to take a commercial break. We ran into a little bit of overtime in that case, but don't worry, we got plenty of more gloves coming up, including Over Under.